colloquium here because he came down for the memorial event for Stan Prusen we had on Friday, which was a fantastic outpouring for those of you who were there. We had, after 2 hours, I think we only got to about half of the short talks and testimonials for Stan. It was a very nice event, about 120 people. John came down and we asked him if he would be willing to stay the weekend and give us a colloquium. He was here about 10 years ago to give the colloquium as well. He was a graduate of this department, getting his master's degree and PhD in 1982, 1987. Was a student of Don Olander's here. His resume is simply too long to succinctly summarize here. Spent most of his career, essentially all of his career at PNNL in nuclear fuel degradation and general engineer materials degradation behavior for systems. But he's had very, very deep experience with the Hanford waste repositories, and for which he's received many honors and professional recognitions. In 2008, he joined the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board, a body that was established in 1988 and came into existence in 1989 by act of Congress. And he's going to tell us today about what the DNFSB does. We read a lot about it. And tell us a little bit about opportunities for young people who would like to get in this very important oversight role. So, John, take it away.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I'm glad to be back. I've seen Echeverry has changed slightly, not a whole lot. I spent almost 10 years within the walls here, and certainly what I'm going to share with you this afternoon relates to that experience that I actually, and the knowledge that I acquired from this particular institution, which has generally served me very well. It certainly trains you very well for the outside world you go into, and also trains you to have the humble understanding of the complexity of science and its application, which is sometimes some things we take for granted. But to begin this talk, I would like to basically put a disclaimer on all the things I'm going to discuss today, given the nature of the work we do for the U.S. government, and especially for Congress and the President and the Secretary of Energy. We always have to express any time we actually speak in public, and not only me as a staffer of DNFSB, but individual board members. The only time the board make a decision is when all board members have a quorum to gather in the public arena to make a decision. That is the only time we usually don't put a disclaimer on anything we talk about. And there are some important elements of that. I will go into it a little bit during the discussion today. And so the views expressed herein are solely those of me as the author of these slides, and no official support or endorsement by the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board or the U.S. government is intended or should be inferred from the discussion we're going to have today. So let's start talking about the board, and I'll start with introducing the new board members that we have on board now, working with the rest of the staff members to do this important sort of role for the U.S. government, and most important for DOE, Department of Energy. The Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board is basically an independent, executive branch agency. It's one of the smallest agencies within the government that was established by Congress in 1988. And if you go back to 1988, a lot of things was happening in this country that actually, and if I was to go into the history, it would take us a whole day to talk about it. But we know about Chernobyl reactor accident. Prior to that, we know about 3 Mile Island. And also we know about a little bit of a transition of the Cold War and all the defense-related type of activities that was going on in the DOE complex. And there was a time within that time period on the 88-87 time frame that the US government was basically embarking on another exercise of revamping the defense activities related to the weapons. And at that time, there was concern of most of the old generation reactors that were basically dedicating in this country for producing plutonium, for most of you who are aware of the weapon production. And so Congress got together and said, in order for DOE, which is a self-regulated agency of the government, to really function well and not create another problem like Chernobyl, we need an independent group of people, well-known people that understand safety implications of various operations within the Department of Energy to come on board to provide an additional oversight to the DOE complex. So that was the beginning of the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board. At the moment, and from its inception, they decided, and they actually thought of mirroring all the activities of the Defense Board, I call in short, almost similar to NRC. And if you look at NRC, they have 5 commissioners. Okay, and so they decided, oh no, we won't call them commissioners. We'll give them a different name to differentiate them from the NRC. So they were called board members. So you have 5 board members that sits on this agency. They are all appointed by the president. And so you have to have political commitment if you want to get appointed for that. And we do have a vice chairman and a chairman that are both directly appointed by the president. So as soon as the president leaves, Obama leaves the office, the chairmanship and the vice chairmanship can change for this agency. Depends on who comes into control. So the 5 board members are all supposed to be very respected experts in nuclear safety. Meaning they should have some kind of scientific background related to nuclear activities. And I'll say that, but at the same time, in today's world, because of political kind of changes, we don't have all 5 board members having that kind of a background. But they should have some connection to do with nuclear safety. That's what is important. So currently we have these 5 board members. Joyce joined the agency only about a month ago. Prior to her being appointed as the chairman of this board, Peter Winnicker was the chairman who retired about close to almost 10 months ago. Jessie Robertson is the vice chair, and she has been on that role for about 3 years now. Okay. Sullivan joined the board about almost 3 years ago, and he came in from the Navy, and he's by profession also a lawyer also. So, but he went through the Navy program, so he knows nuclear activities. Another board member is Daniel Santos, who came to us from NRC. He used to be at NRC and joined the board about a year ago. Bruce is only about 2 weeks old. Bruce Hamilton joined the board about two weeks ago. So, but what's important, for almost 2 years, we never actually had a full board. And what is important in that role is that since most decisions related to some of the safety concerns we, the staff, identify when we actually evaluate DOE, those things are basically composed in the format a technical write-up to the board, and the board writes a letter either to the secretary, or sometimes in the case of NNSA activities, directly to the administrator. Okay. And for them to agree on the format and the framework of the language that goes into that formal letter that is going to go to the secretary, all board members have to agree. Okay? And not having less of the board members sometimes make it very difficult to convince one who doesn't agree. And one of the challenges we have gone through for the past 2 years is we had only 3 board members. And so with the legal quorum that you need for them to be able to vote is 3 members. So when you have 3 members, it becomes a real challenge when one is really not in agreement with the various policies they want to write. And so most of our letters and recommendations have not made it into the DOE because one member didn't agree to that. So now that you have 5 board members, that really helps with that decision-making process. So we are very grateful to now have 5 board members working with us as technical staff members. So I'll talk a little bit about the enabling and statute that governs the board's activities. The statute really assigns the board the responsibility to identify the nature and consequences of potential threats to the public health and safety at the Department of Energy Defense Nuclear Facilities, to elevate those issues to the highest, meaning the highest level of authority in this country. That is the board's role. And most of the time, most of our recommendations and letters go directly to the secretary, but that language in that enabling statute says that if the secretary doesn't listen to us, the next in that hierarchy is the president. And so if we write a letter to the secretary and he doesn't agree with us and we deem it necessary, we then communicate directly to the president to make a decision. Okay? The statute creates an oversight framework that addresses several competing congressional concerns. When the Congress actually formed the board, they expressed certain concerns, and so the statute really addresses those things and makes it very, very clear to us in our role to work with the Department of Energy to make sure those concerns are really taken into consideration when we actually evaluate the OEE. One is to preserve the Secretary's power. And there's a need for that because the Secretary is the only one who has the responsibility of delivering the weapons to DOD. We don't. And so they wanted us to make sure that we maintain that sort of recognition that the Secretary is the only person that can do that. That's first one. We also need to recognize that DOE is a self-regulating agency. They make their own laws and they evaluate their own law. Okay? But the role we play here in that exercise of self-regulating agency is we have a say, which is one of the things written in our enabling legislation on the extension of it, on how DOE makes those laws. We call them DOE directives and standards and guides and policies. We are giving the first input into reviewing whether we think the way these directives are written really protects the public safety and health. And if we don't like it, we tell DOE and then we ask them to change it. If they don't change it, we go to the president for a change. Okay? And also, within that whole framework, we need to understand the budget constraint that DOE have to work with. Some of our recommendations have cost DOE $1 billion. There's currently a large-scale testing going on on the harmful side to determine the complete mixing of the waste form as it goes into the waste treatment facility, which I'll talk a little about, as costing DOE $1 billion. So our decisions can really cost a lot of money. And so when we are making those recommendations, the enabling legislation is telling us you need to be cognizant of that cost constraint, because you don't want to derail the Secretary's responsibility of delivering the weapon to DOD. Also, we need to be cognizant of the fact that most of our recommendations should really enhance the safety envelope of the DOE defense nuclear facilities. And most of the time when I talk about the DOE, I qualify it with defense nuclear facilities because that is what we have jurisdiction over. We don't oversee Office of Science activities. We don't even oversee DOE nuclear energy activities. The only time those departments within the DOE comes under our jurisdiction if they are using defense-related material. That always comes under our jurisdiction. It doesn't matter where they use it for. We have to monitor. Just like waste streams, the way you dispose of waste is generated and you follow it all the way to its grave. And we do the same thing with the defense materials that is in this country. Okay? Then the last one is the most important that the board dwells on very, very, very. On any letter we write, that becomes a very important. Assurance of the public confidence. Okay? That DOE nuclear facilities are operated without undue risk to the public health and safety. And that statement entails a whole lot. It depends on who's looking at it, how you're defining what that public risk is, what material risk you're thinking about, how individuals, communities around your facilities have defined their own risk, meaning the stakeholders' influence, and that particular statement is sometimes the most controversial element of what we do as an agency. Because we have that legal responsibility to make sure that that public confidence is not in any way
That sounds like that last thing is kind of a catch-22. If you make a recommendation for safety enhancement,
Yes.
it implies that the safety was not enhanced before the recommendation
Correct.
is accepted.
Yes.
And so that tends to undermine public confidence. So how do you go about making recommendations for enhancement without implying that it's not safe enough to?
Well, that's why I'm saying that becomes a very sort of a debatable kind of topic we go through in our whole exercise. Yeah, you're right. Anytime we put out there a letter that says DOE is not doing so good, then of course the communities in that neighborhood are saying, oh, okay, we didn't know that that's something that VAG was really sitting out of backyard. And so you need to balance that. And we tend to reasonably try to balance, and for most part, especially for most of the defense-related kind of facilities, we have been able to maintain a good relationship with the stakeholders. In fact, they depend on us more than they depend on DOE to ensure their own safety, for most part.
Question, so you had mentioned on your fourth bullet there, the definition of your purview had to do with it was defined by the materials, so whether they were materials for the purposes of defense. If I think back, it's now shut down, to the Atlas program.
Atlas, yeah.
That had a relationship both with the U.S. Enrichment Corporation for civilian nuclear energy, but it also had what I think might have been quite clearly a defense posture as well. Did that fall under the purview of the?
Yes. If I went with one board member to visit some of those facilities, what they were doing, yes, we do. Like I said, that definition doesn't go away. It's any material related to the defense. It's out there. Any more questions on this? Okay. So, what are the functions and powers of the board? I want to share with that from that enabling legislation. With regards to the design, the construction, operation, and decommissioning of all defense nuclear facilities, the board has the following responsibilities and power. We review and evaluate the content and implementation of all standards applicable to that particular facility. And there are hundreds of these facilities, give you a little bit of rough ideas. We also analyze design and operational data. That means even your rebar, how you lay your rebar to construct a new facility. If it's a nuclear facility, it is of importance to us. How that rebar is going to corrode, what environment is going to see. So it gives you a little idea of the technical challenges we go through as we evaluate these facilities. All the standards are applicable to just laying the concrete, the curing method, water content, and all those things. We follow all that to the details in order to be able to assess whether that facility is going to be able to do its function, especially most important is safety function. Okay. We also can conduct investigations and find out what is wrong, even though we cannot enforce certain actions to DOE contractors. We do the investigation and we give it to the enforcement agency of the department to enforce what the rules are. And in some cases, if they don't, we give it to DOJ if we see the real legal element of that one. Okay. We provide reports to DOE and the public on board review activities of all the things we do. Everything we do is public. This is where one of the other challenges we face. I would say 70% of our activities are classified, and yet we have to be able to communicate that one to the public without revealing classified information. That is always a challenge. Okay? And we make such recommendation to the Secretary of Energy as the board determines that it is definitely necessary to ensure the public health and safety. The board goes through a laborious deliberation, making that decision, whether our recommendation is really fits into that framework of public health and safety. And a lot of recommendations, tech staff have made it to the board that didn't see the eye of the day because of that reason. To accomplish these activities, the board is authorized to conduct public and closed hearing and subpoena witnesses. And that means if you see something really illegal, we have our own form of a court where people really swear, basically become witness under oath. And if you lie to the board, you could be jailed for that reason. So we do that. It's part of our activities. We started bounding reporting requirements for the secretary when we make recommendation or we write any letter to the secretary. We also send letters to DOE on issues from ongoing reviews that we think we're doing to make the secretary aware of what we're doing. And then we conduct special studies. And that statement is important because being a government agency with a lot of technical people like myself, one of the other things, leverages they are able to keep some of us is that instead of doing our own research like most of you do, I did in university, they allow us, if we come up with a topic that's of interest to the board, to do a special study. One of the things myself and a colleague did recently, and we wrote a whole report on that, which the board decided not to release it, that the board asked us to study all major accidents that has happened in this country for the last decade, not necessarily nuclear related. And so you have things like Deepwater Horizon. Okay, and in that framework, what we're looking at is what are the shortfalls of regulations and oversight that could have prevented an accident, that were not really well exercised by the oversight agency of the government. Okay. The other one, we certainly look at Fukushima at that time when the Fukushima had just also happened, so we looked at that. But we look at Fukushima as something that happened in a foreign country, so we use our study and our conclusions to compare whether it's also applicable to Fukushima, that type of things. And to find out where the regulations and the oversight activities failed in that whole exercise. And it was really an important study, which, even though the report was not made public because of the sensitivity associated with that, it's found its way into activities like Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board, Chemical Safety Board, National Transportation Board reviews some of our findings and so to help them as they actually embark on exercise of providing oversight of some other responsibility. So things like that is what we call special studies. Any questions related to that? So what are the sites we are responsible for? Currently we have 10 active sites that the board is responsible for. The whole Hanford site, where you have waste treatment, and about 177 defense-related tank waste underground. You have spent fuel that are currently now stored in a dry storage facility. You have a PFP facility that used to be processing most of the plutonium inventory in this country. So all those things on the Hanford side, yeah, we oversee it. And if you go back to Hanford side, the PNNL side is under the Office of Science, but the building 325, which is a Cat 2 nuclear facility, is under our private. So that's where we sort of go beyond various departments. That's the classic example of that. The Savannah River site, and here we separate the Savannah River National Laboratory from the Savannah River site, so mostly related to NNSA activities on that particular site. Idaho National Laboratory, we stay away from any research activities, but any other prior activities that generate defense-related waste is under our purview at the Idaho National. Sandia National Laboratory, most of it. All the, basically the three NNSA labs are definitely of interest to us because they only work mostly on defense-related activities. Not true, not all of it. I'll say mostly. That's what I said, yeah. So, and again, even if we go to those labs, our jurisdiction is only on the defense nuclear facilities and its materials. Any other activities for the design that doesn't come under that, so purview is not, we don't pay any attention to that. Okay? And then you have Y12 National Security Complex. That's called the uranium capital of the world. It has all the uranium you need in the whole world over there at various enrichment there. And that is where about half of the weapon assembly, disassembly takes place at that particular plant. And so we oversee that. And then Pantex is the other half of that activity, where the other half of the weapons are actually assembled and disassembled. And that's basically where the final product is generated before it's handed over to DOD, and then we wash our hands off that once it goes into DOD. The waste isolation power plant. This is the only known repository in this country which is currently having problems. I don't know whether you guys are reading about it. Related to the kitty litter that blew up. Actually, let me digress a little bit. Some of us have looked at that accident and we don't think it's the kitty litter that initiated that event. Okay? And that might be an interesting sort of philosophical discussion for you. To look at the shape form of the marked oxides, the nature of the lift of that lake, the initiating temperature of that chemistry, the complex chemistry of the organic reaction, the reaction rate, whether that is adequate by itself over time, and not thinking. And so and that's the kind of sort of scientific challenges we go through to really evaluate. Not thinking that when they actually loaded that waste, it sat in Los Alamos for a whole period of time, and for some magic reason, nothing happened. What initiated that event at work? It's still a mystery. I'll leave that thought to you when you can think about it. Some of us have come up with a scenario that will lead to that, but something I can't discuss in public. But that's the nature. We allow DOE to do their own evaluation, and we sit down and go through the whole process to analyze the data and come out with it. And when the DOE came in to brief the board, I had the honor to really challenge them on some of their theories with that. They spent millions of dollars doing experiments. They did a wrong experiment in that process for my that is something we go through. But it is necessary to really be able to find the root cause of that problem, because otherwise we won't be able to solve it for the next case. Okay? And the Nevada National Security Site, and the most important what the facility we are interested in there, which is very active, is basically the criticality experiment program over there at the Nevada test site.
John, Kansas City plant would be an example of something that doesn't have nuclear components, is off your radar? Or?
It's off our radar. We don't even pay attention to it.
Okay.
Yes. Even though they do a lot of different designs. And we also do have some facilities that are not active now, but still under our jurisdiction, and we pay attention to those. One of them is Rocky Flats, which closed. You have the West Valley, which still have some fuel on site, and the Mount. We still pay attention to it for its environmental release characteristics also, even though they are not on our active list. So at this point, having described the framework in which the board really works to determine what it considers is a concern or issue that the secretary needs to pay attention to, I'm going to walk through some examples of some of our reviews, how we do our reviews, and how we determine that we have a safety case or safety issue that the board needs to issue a letter or recommendation. And we typically have two forms of communications to the secretary, what we call a letter. The letter usually comes with a reporting requirement from DOE. Typically, we give them 45 days to respond to the board. And most of the letters we write to the secretary. And typically, the nature of the letter is such that it's really focused on a very specific issue we have with the department and its operation of some of those nuclear facilities. Now, a letter can write up to a recommendation if you find various aspects of that same issue with other facilities or with DOE-wide activity. And typically the recommendation goes through, in fact, we just had a little bit of modification of our enabling legislation because most recommendations comes up with a big price tag associated with it because DOE has to write a whole comprehensive implementation plan for most of our recommendations, how we are going to resolve the issues we have identified in our recommendation. And sometimes it takes years, and there are some of recommendations like 2005, 2004 that are still open, that DOE is still working on them. That some of the issues still haven't been resolved. And so to put out the recommendation is a big deal for DOE especially. And so the board goes through a lengthy process. And in the changes in our enabling legislation in 2013, the Congress has now asked us to give the draft recommendation to the Secretary and allow him to review the draft for 30 days and come up with some clarification that helps them develop the response to the board on some of those. Because of the price tag associated with this recommendation, Congress feels like DOE has that benefit to be able to influence the way we write the recommendation, if they deem it necessary to do that. And it's up to the Secretary to come up with a concrete sort of reasons why he thinks we need to change the format and the framework surrounding that recommendation. So we give him 30 days to read it, share with his few experts, and come up back with some kind of a suggestion of what he thinks needs to be incorporated in the recommendation. And since that legislature was ready in 2013, we have issued 3 recommendations to the Secretary. We've gone through that process. So far, we haven't seen the changes come back. So, give you a little bit of indication of that. So, one of the things we do is basically operational activities within these nuclear facilities. It's what we call activity work planning and control. Because when you really look at it, if you're going to have any event, it's when people are really doing an activity, that's when you're going to have some kind of event. Things don't initiate by itself unless you have fiddle with that type of thing. So something may have caused that. And so we go around all these nuclear facilities, and for the tech staff we travel around the whole 10 sites to various facilities and all those things. Not on a weekly basis, but when we think it's necessary, visit them and do a thorough review of some of the activities going on. And then we'll come back to DC and basically collect our thoughts and look at the data we got, and then make either a recommendation to the board to issue a letter, or we just write an info paper to the board for their own information only to track those kind of activities. And when we go through that process, we look at criticality, how materials are stored. We look at flammable materials that is handled, how they are stored. We look at the chemical kinetics associated with the various processes they're doing. And so there are a lot of sort of technical challenges there that we need to understand, even though we didn't design some of these processes in these facilities. And so we read volumes and volumes of reports. And unfortunately, I say volumes and volumes because sometimes we, the tech staff, feel like the contractors intentionally load us with volumes of reports so that we might not catch all the hidden truths within the operation. And so some of us have really cultivated a smart way of sifting through that volumes of information to come up with various areas where they actually lack the standards associated with the area of safety. And so one example on these things, when we looked at some of the complex, we identified some of these, that the basic principles of integrated management safety is not well applied in some of these facilities. That would be one. So how did we come to that conclusion? We look at individuals doing the work, we look at the documentation governing the work, we look at the decision-making process of management in either focusing on the safety element or focusing on the mission. We look at the mistakes and procedures not being followed. We look at all of those and we come to that conclusion. And that typically will be the kind of statement the board uses to communicate to the secretary. Okay? A standard for how to develop a work planning and control program will greatly benefit the DOE nuclear facility complex. That's one statement we come to, looking at all the elements of that particular review. Work planning standards should be integrated with DOE's integrated safety management and oversight guides. Okay, now we are not only telling DOE what they should do right, but they also have the responsibility of providing oversight of those activities. And we can tell DOE when it's not doing that oversight responsibility. We are the only people that can tell DOE that it's not there. Right? So that would be one example of our review, which involves a whole lot of interactions. Yes.
I think I've just seen such an obvious point here that underlies a lot of the tension you have with the NMSA.
Yes.
The NFSB was set up in the late 80s. Yes. NMSA was only established a decade later or so,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
to give specific focus and a high degree of autonomy to focus on these very specialized facilities that they have.
Yes.
But the original authorizing legislation, you're talking over the head of the NMSA administrator.
Sure.
Of course he's going to be madder than hell. I mean, because basically he owns those plans.
Yes, he does.
And he has to construct his own budget every year.
Yes.
Isn't that something that's structurally out of whack? Shouldn't it? I mean, when NSA was set up, it seems to me that properly, you should be, in an ideal world, you would be reporting to the administrator rather than the secretary.
Yeah, and that debate is still going on in fact, whether NSA stays as autonomous element of DOE is still being debated, and we don't think it will survive because it's struggling with some of these issues. Yeah. I don't think it is completely out of norm for the role we play, because this is one of the things we struggle with. Anytime we go to the site, we discuss with them exactly some of the issues we find with them directly before even we issue a letter. We talk to them, we try to work with them from staff to staff level to smoothing that. And if they work with us, we don't issue a letter. We give them that opportunity to do that. But most of the time, what you find within the complex is they have a challenge of budget, time, and politics that constrain them with some of those things. And sometimes that we think sometimes from our point of view sitting at the top level there is that influence them more than the safety element of the activities they are conducting. And I was talking to Peter this saying, if DOE start thinking that safety is not an added feature to the operation and think it's an inherent component of the operation, you'll do much better than what you're doing now. Go ahead.
I was a student at Los Alamos National Laboratory in the 2005-2006 timeframe. both before and after the transition from oversight by University of California to LANS. And I think at that time they were still implementing integrated safety management and integrated work documents and things like that, and griping about it. And I, as a student, heard the story that came from DOE, but who's DOE? Just from on high. And I was wondering, did that actually come from the board? Did you say to DOE, you need to do integrated safety management, and they started to implement it and it filtered down?
Actually, our original recommendations didn't say integrated safety management. It's DOE who coined that word.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The recommendation said your conduct of operation activities is not meeting the standard. Basically, that's what it says. And so in responding to that recommendation, DOE initiated the integrated safety management system, which looks good. And they typically that document comes to us, and the board has agreed that that is a good response to their recommendation before they go on and implement it.
Okay. But that answers my question. That it was initiated by the board.
Yeah. The board initiated.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
It seems to me, having worked at nuclear power plants, that the DNFSB has pretty much the same position in the DOE as the QA manager has at a nuclear power plant. That the QA manager reports directly to the CEO of the utility, and he can't be overruled by anybody like the plant manager. Is that?
That's not correct. And actually, the language in our enabling list, our budget last year attempted to actually solve some of that problem. They were telling DOE that you need to sharpen your pencil and get people who understand these tech savvies at Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board, who are making all these recommendations. You have no way of really being able to push back. So DOE, the secretary, do have the power to push back any recommendation we send to him. He has that power. Congress didn't take that one away from him. So yeah, that's what I'm saying, that's the difference. But it's up to the secretary to come out with a reasonable sort of logic governing that refusal or unaccepted signs of our letter or recommendation. To write it, because these things are all in the public arena. That's what also throws in the challenge for them, because this thing has to be debated in the public arena. He has to basically, anytime we send a recommendation there, it's basically in the Federal Register. Everybody reads it. So all your basically stakeholders are aware of what the board puts out there to deal with issues. Okay. Like I said, we don't write anything that's not public. We do everything in the public arena except the classified stuff. Okay? One other area which is very current, and we just wrote the recommendation 2004-1 on this. Following Fukushima, DOE was supposed to really go through a whole exercise of learning how to respond to emergency. And we thought they were going to do what? They organized workshops around the complex, they did a stress test around the complex, and we thought they would solve a lot of the problems within the complex. And so we went in trying to understand what they've done. And we found a lot of holes in how DOE responds to emergency. And so we wrote this summary, which led to a recommendation by the board to DOE, which has also impacted not only DOE, but some of the other government agencies, how we all treat emergency. In some way, this country doesn't do very well how we respond to emergency. If you go back to what happened in Fukushima and other emergency, and then of course, Katrina is another example of all those accident response type, or emergency response type of things. So we read a recommendation which Congress have picked it up, which we never intended it to be, but so it's becoming another big issue. And some of the things we found out is that DOE emergency management policies have been one of the few directives where the requirements have been just added on, but there's no prescriptive nature of the guidance that really helps anybody to do anything in the case of an emergency. So it's just one of those other things. There's a lot of documentation, but no action. Okay. And the performance at DOE sites has varied, and some improvements then have to be consistent with the guidelines on the policies of emergency response. Okay, some of the drills they do have very limited engagement to. If you look at the facilities, what could potentially happen that they need to respond to. They try these tabletops that are very simplistic, and most people don't pay attention because they think it's just a drill. Those are some of the things we found within the DOE complex. Most of the activities are also geared towards one facility event or one event instead of a multi-facility impact, where you have no way of being able to get to the facilities that you're dealing with, or major earthquake, or multiple flooding kind of events in most of the sites. Because most of these sites think they don't have a major river, so flooding will never happen there. We know it can rain 10 inches of an hour and you can have major flooding in any location in the United States. So you need to be prepared for those things. And those are the things that the Secretary is now dealing with, which is one of them. So we look at things like that, because we view the emergency response is your last line of defense. You can never prevent an accident. Accident will always happen. But if it happens, you might be able to reduce the consequences to the general public if you respond appropriately.
So, question of the handoff here. The other thing that's obviously very topical and timely, all the labs, I saw this at Livermore, protective service people are drilling every night on the design basis threat in case of a terrorist attack to grab plutonium. Does the DMSB get involved in the preparation of the protection of material in case of a terrorist attack rather than just an accident, or is that somebody else's?
That's all inclusive. Yeah.
Okay, so you're involved in that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any question like that? So we touched on conduct of operation, we talked about emergency preparedness, and now I want to move on to another example. It's this major facility construction work that's going on the Hanford site, which is being designed to vitrify the liquid waste. We have about 177 underground tanks, some of which have already leaked. And so there's a major effort embarked on by the Department of Energy I don't want to plug and play anything. Okay. Department of Energy to build a new facility to vitrify all this wastewater, to put it in a much more stable form. Okay. And one of the challenges we have with this particular project is you have 4 major nuclear facilities that's being built. Very huge facilities. These 4 is the pre-treatment facility, the analytical laboratory, high-level waste facility, and the low-activity facility. And the most important portion of this project is the pre-treatment facility, because DOE in its infinite wisdom has decided in order to be able to minimize the waste form that is going to generate from this process, they are going to do a comprehensive chemistry in the facility to separate out the really high activity waste from put in the glass form, separate out the cesium, but in the end also mix it up with the high activity waste to create the high level waste. All the major sort of impurities in the waste, which consists of about maybe 80% of the waste is going to be declared as basically contaminated waste, is the low activity waste. Okay. Oh, is my battery dying?
Yeah.
Ooh. I didn't bring my.
John, how many more slides do you have?
How about 2 or 3 more?
Okay, we're about a touch over time.
Oh, okay.
This has been interesting.
Yes.
We've had a lot of questions,
Yes.
but
Let me.
any other points you make without graphics?
Okay, yeah. Sorry about that. Okay. Since we are already over time, I'll maybe summarize my thought. And so some of the things we look at is that chemistry associated with that separation. The mixing of the waste as it comes through to really keep all that solid in solution has become a challenge for DOE. And not only do you need to really concentrate on that solid, some of those solids have a lot of plutonium in it. And so criticality becomes another issue for them. When you separate the solid, the leveling measurement on that vessel which they are processing also becomes a big issue for them. You have hydrogen generation due to radiolysis, that becomes an issue. All those complex chemistry phenomena needs to be addressed in that facility. And that was the recommendation we wrote on that particular project. So to give you a rough idea of what keeps us busy and what keeps some of us awake all night long is going through the thought process using the science and the engineering to really find out what is wrong with the processes that is being conducted by DOE. So with that, I'll conclude and wait for you.
I was astonished when I was talking with John this afternoon to find out that, when you said it's one of the smallest federal agencies, there's only 100 people working there, of which 40 are the legal administrators. There's only 60 technical people doing all this.
Yes.
This is quite astonishing. Anyway, a couple questions.
Well, you just answered one of my 3 questions, which is there are about 60 technical people.
Yes.
Now, how many of these letters and recommendations do you generate in a year? And how many inspections and other things do you do?
Okay.
Just to get a feeling for the scope of this.
We typically achieve writing anywhere between 12 to 20 letters a year.
Okay, and so those
Okay.
those are the results where you feel there's a concern.
Yes.
But clearly, that's a minority of all the work you do.
Yes.
Most of the time, things are okay.
We write,
So
on average, I would say 5 info papers a week.
Yeah, so
And those info papers are all linked to a review.
I just wanted to get a feeling for what fraction of the things that you do turn out to be okay. I have the impression it's 90% of things are okay, you know.
I would say somewhere between maybe 70 to 80%
Oh.
of the things are okay. About 20% we find fault with the review.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Most of the time, yeah. Okay? Yes.
What fraction of the work is classified that you can't communicate to the public?
You can look at the 10 sites and it gives you a rough idea. All the NNSA activities, including the 2 plants and the Nevada test site, all those material, all those activities, most of them are classified. So having 10, so you can say almost 50 to 60% is classified. The other EM activities are not all classified. Those are general, yeah. Okay?
Let me ask a question that might be pertinent to students. I know like the NRC will hire somebody coming out of college with a nuclear engineering degree. Would the board do that, or does the board limit only to experience?
Yeah, we do have some pamphlets, and I want you to pick some up and read a lot more. We do have a program for undergraduate students, especially the junior level students, whom we actually invite to come in and work with us during summer. like the last year when you're going to be a senior. And typically we pick out from that selection about 2 to 3 of them to work in what we call a PE, Professional Development Program. Well, you come in and work with us for a year, the board pays your salary, and then send you to any institution in this country you want to go and complete your master's. To become a full staff, we need a minimum degree of a master's degree. Okay, so the board will pay for your school fees and your travel and everything, and still give you salary, and to allow you to complete your master's program. When you come back on the 3rd year assignment, we can send you to any of the national labs, you work within the national lab, or any industry that has some relevance to the work we do. And you work with them for a year, the boss still pay your salary and everything. Then after that, you join us. That is for the undergraduate program. The graduates, we hire anybody fresh out of school sometimes. You come in at what we call DN2 level, which is equivalent to the government system, almost GS 12, 13 level. So it's reasonable, well-paid level. Okay, and then our DN ranking goes all the way to DN5. DN5 is SES level within the government, even though you don't manage anything. So you're then given a chance to just do technical work at that level. So which most of us with experience are at that level. Okay.
Let's thank our speaker again. That was very, very interesting.
Please pick up any of those things. I don't want to take them home. So.
My email?
No.
A week ago. I love it. Is spam.
Well, that's probably why it went into my spam folder. So I'll look for it.
It was either very cleverly constructed spam or it was request from at your service online, but it was asking questions that I thought were coming the wrong way. One of those things where if you clicked on the link, it took you to some page, but it was hard to tell whether it was a Trojan link.
Yeah, they're being pretty crafty, but I might have gotten the same one. I'll look for it and respond.
My work
You shouldn't know you.
This would be the national security.
Yeah, they have to be like this.
So I set my
No class today.
Thank you.
So, okay, that's good. And I'll have a driver out there.